my name is Jessie, and I did my portion of the presentation on finding definitions in Chapter 5 by McWhorter. So in this portion of the readings, McWhorter is discussing the Phoenicians who are from modern-day Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. They spoke a Semitic language that is no longer in existence, but it is said to be very similar to the Hebrew language. The Phoenicians really liked to travel and colonize, but they did it very diligently. They were very conscientious with all of their moves and traveling and stuff. They were even known to have an advanced sailing technique that helped them through the northern and southern Mediterranean Sea. They were able to take over major colonies in North America. They even made an appearance in Carthage, and they were known to go as far west as Spain. They even have records that show that they went all the way to Portugal, but that's where their records stop, and we don't really know what happened to them after that because they were pretty secretive about their travels and their sailing, and many of the places that they could have traveled to have since sunk since then. There are many references to the Phoenicians throughout history, but some things changed because of Proto-Germanic and just how their language developed. For example, in some German literature, there is the mentioning of two gods. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these correctly, but Fol and Balder. And it is believed that Fol came from the Phoenicians' religion of their god, Baal. Don't know if I'm saying that correct either. The transition of this word comes from when Proto-Germanic got a little weird. Words that began with B all of a sudden started with P, so the god's name changed from Baal to Paul. And then the name changed again when Proto-Germanic changed to Old High German, and P began to make the F sound, so it was replaced with PH. So the transition went from Paul to fall. Then you have influences from the Proto-Indo-European era where the A sound changes to a long O sound. So the god's name was then changed from fall to fool. Some of the same instances can be found with many words over time, and many phonetic words, I guess. Many words in their language have transitioned and changed. So they discuss where there's been a lot of evidence of the Phoenicians, their traveling, and their influence on other languages, but where they went is still kind of a mystery. So my question is, what do you think happened to the Phoenicians?
Proto-Germanic was just like English when it comes to Germanic languages and just how much language it has really lost. Proto-Indo-European marked its nouns with 8 noun cases. Latin was an Indo-European language who had 6 cases: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, and vocative, and some words had a locative. The older Slavic languages had 7 cases, and Lithuania does too. Old Irish, an early Celtic language, had 5 cases, like ancient Greek and Albania does now. Proto-Germanic had just 4. Those 4 cases in German wear learners out today, but they're only half of what Proto-Indo-European had. Even though there were significantly less cases, it was still a lot harder to learn. In the same way as Indo-European languages go, it's weird that in English the only verb endings are the ones for present and past tense. I wait, I waited, and that's about it. In German it's basically the same.
Ich warte.
That means I wait or I'm waiting.
Ich wartete.
That means I waited. Because German and English are very similar, this is what they sound like. There are no endings that mark the future, for example. English does future with the word will, and German uses a will in their own way, and this is pronounced
werden.
That's how it is in all Germanic languages, and that's how it was in Proto-Germanic. Spanish used endings to not only mark the present and past tense, but also the imperfect, future, conditional, subjunctive, and imperfect subjunctive. Spanish has taken this even further than the Proto-Indo-Europeans did in some ways, because the Proto-Indo-Europeans did not have conditional endings. Where did all this go with Proto-Germanic? Some languages that came from Proto-Indo-European held on to what it was used to, but in Proto-Germanic it just fell off. We as Germanic speakers have created little words like will and would to pick up what we are missing. So my question is, how many noun cases did the Proto-Indo-Europeans use? And are you glad that Proto-Germanic only have 4 cases? Why or why not?
Today I will be discussing section 4.2 of Changing English. The main concepts include colonization and the problems with colonization. England's occupation spread to 3 specific Celtic areas, which included Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. This is important to know because not only was English introduced to these areas, but it also became the main language in these areas over Celtic. The colonization was forced on these Celtic regions for both religious and political motives. The knights from England would receive gifts of land and would actually move to these non-colonized areas, which made them colonized. The first colonies were established in both Ireland, Scotland, and Wales in the 1600s. There were specific reasons for these territories to become colonized, such as economic, social, political, displacement, subjection, and replacement reasons. Political incorporation happened first in these Celtic colonies. In 1707, Scotland and England were combined into the name Great Britain. The main languages which had been the Celtic in these territories was changed to English over time. Many of the groups which had been colonized responded by using their former Celtic language to identify as a separatist from English rule. Not only did the Celts start to care for their old language, but the English also started to admire the Celtic language as well. Even though these people had been stripped of their language, the nationalistic values made them want to keep their Celtic speech alive. There were consequences that stemmed from the colonization of English. The English language formed into new varieties, which was exposed to other languages. In areas with most English group, such as Australia or North America, the impact of change in English was very slight. Changes did happen, such as the adoption of words from the natives and some cultural practices from the natives. Dialect leveling occurs when different groups of people who have different Englishes mix together. Over the time, the language which was split becomes a uniform English in a new type.
Hello, my name is Matthew Morrison, and I will be discussing a section of Chapter 5 from McWhorter's book that we've been studying. And this section is entitled Proto-Germanic was full of orphaned words. And to kind of put this in its context, this chapter is discussing the things that happened to English before it was English, specifically when it was the Proto-Germanic language. And in this specific section, the writer is discussing about how there are issues in our understanding of the Proto-Germanic language. In fact, there is about a third of the words from Proto-Germanic that do not trace back to the Proto-Indo-European words. So in other words, no one knows where this section of the language came from. And just some examples that he gives, words that often refer to things like seafaring. So words like ship, sea, strand, and sail, they have no connection to any other European language that we're familiar with. For example, in French, mer, in Italian, mer, Russian, more, Polish, mors, Welsh, more. All those words refer to something like a lake or a body of water. But none of those sound like our word for sea. And so we don't really know what happened between the Proto-Indo-European language and the Proto-Germanic language that influenced it and brought about some of these words that we still hold on to today. And if we were like, Germans per se, instead of having seafood, we would have Marfood. But there's this disconnect between English and the other European languages, and it stems back farther than we've been studying up until this point. And lastly, I would like to mention another example is the word punch, like referring to the drink punch, like you get at a party. This word comes from, it doesn't come from some type of word that means liquid. It actually comes from the Proto-Indo-European word for five, because when punch was first invented, there were 5 ingredients. And so the author is basically conveying this idea that we don't know what this third of the Proto-Germanic language came from, but there are many instances like what I just shared where words don't necessarily mean exactly what you might think. Whereas in this example, the word punch isn't coming from an older language talking about a liquid. It's coming from an older language talking about the number of ingredients. So you never know how a word is connected to what that word is describing. And his point basically is that because of this mystery in the origins of our language, it's difficult to be very strict about grammatical structure and just grammar rules and English standards, because there's so much that we can't standardize, if that makes sense. And so that's really what he's getting at. That's his main argument, and I think it's a really good addition, especially in this final chapter, with his argument about the mystery and the complexity of English.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Rhodes, and I want to talk about the spread of English beyond the British Isles, or English in North America. We established last week that one of the ways other languages loaned words to the English language was trade between English speakers and speakers of other languages. Moving into the 17th century, a group of English-speaking settlers established the Jamestown colony in Virginia, located in North America. By 1640, there were 25,000 more Europeans in the area. Looking at our map in our Changing English textbook, page 134, you can see the settlements in Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. The areas were settled mostly by English and Welsh in the pink, French to the north and northwest in blue, and Dutch in bright yellow to the west. The southern portion of North America, where there were very large plantations, were settled mostly by English-speaking people from the south and west of England. These were consisting mostly of deportees and political refugees. Slaves were transported from Africa, where they spoke many different languages, and taken to the southern part of North America to perform labor. Let us stop here for a minute and take another look at the map to see that there were Native Americans from tribes such as the Powhatan, Shawnee, Cherokee, Creek, and others already living in these areas, speaking their own languages. Modern English-speaking settlers traded with these Native Americans. They hired household help from and tried to teach and convert the pre-colonial Native Americans. Although English only borrowed around 300 or so words from Native Americans, such as skunk, squash, and squaw, they changed or made short many of them. Many of North American state names come from Native American words, however. In the state of Alabama, there are many towns and counties with Native American borrowed names, such as Etowah County, Cherokee County, and many more. It is said that English displaced the language of Native Americans, and as a captured people, Native American language had little or no influence on the English language. What do you think? My question is, do you agree with the textbook that Native American language had very little influence on modern English? Please explain. Thank you for your time.